All right. Welcome, everyone. Sorry for the delay, bit of technical difficulties here, but we're really happy to have everyone join us. And we're going to kick it off with Lieutenant Governor Davis here.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you all today, and I want to thank you all for taking some time to be here with us. Across our great Commonwealth, gun violence is going down, and that's not by accident. It's not by chance. It's a result of the work that Governor Shapiro and I's administration has been doing. We've been strategic about our investments in public safety, in prevention, and in community supports. In fact, just last week, we successfully secured a 10% increase totaling $62 million for PCCD's successful violence intervention and prevention program, which has been instrumental in reducing gun violence and community violence all across Pennsylvania. Additionally, through the passage of our recent bipartisan state budget, we also secured a much needed $9 million in funding for the Victims Compensation Assistance Program. All of this is going to continue the trend to helping bring down gun violence and community violence across Pennsylvania. Many of you may know this issue is personal to me. I got my start in public service after an incident of gun violence in my community when I was 16 years old. It spurred me to take action and to get involved in reducing gun violence and making our community safer has been something that I've done throughout my entire career, from my time in Allegheny County government to the state legislature, and now as lieutenant governor and chairman of the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency. So we are so excited about the resources that we were able to secure, the work that we've been doing over the last couple of years, and we look forward to continuing this work and making sure all of Pennsylvania's communities are safer. We recognize there are still challenges out there, but we're going to work every day to continue to build a foundation for safety and security in every community across Pennsylvania. So I hope you all have a great session and a great day, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. It's my pleasure. I want to pass things off to someone that I've known for years from my time as a state representative, Tina Ford, who's the founder of Moms of Murdered Sons. I got to meet her right after her son, Armani Ford, was tragically taken away from us. So, Miss Tina, the floor is yours.
First, that I was with a couple of moms over the weekend, and we had conversations. And one thing that we had wanted is the media to do follow-ups. That was very important for a lot of the moms, only because when we have like our year anniversary, we still want the community to know what the status is, even if they're not at that point in their life where they have closure, where the person who did commit the murder, the crime of their loved one, still letting the community know that, hey, it has not been solved. We still are out here. We're a family who still misses our loved one, and just letting people know that you're not alone, because it's not stopping. We just had a murder in Clairton on Friday. And what it does is, for a lot of the moms, is I have 7 years in where my son, 7 years ago, but it sets you back, and it makes you feel for the family. And then it puts you right back where you were, whenever you lost your loved one to gun violence. And just knowing that the media is there to cover that information, but we also want them to also be there a year later to just letting people know what the status is of everything. So other than that, just being a mom, being out here supporting other mothers, sometimes, it's hard sometimes. And a lot of people have a hard time because it's a struggle. You go through your 5 stages of grief, but then you never leave them. You just, different day is a different state of mind that you're in. So we just need the help also with, as far as the community, outside the community, the media and everything, because it's not going away. And I just told someone the other day, I was like, this is starting to be a household name, where you're going to have each home, in your community that has lost someone to gun violence. So maybe we need to start looking at different ways of doing that, different media outlets, having people come out, be involved, interviewing, people, different stages. I have one lady in my group, she lost her son 25 years ago. So it's just different stages and different levels where people are at mentally. So that's all I wanted to share today.
Okay, and there I am. I'm next in the agenda, I guess. Good afternoon, and thank you to Lieutenant Governor Davis and PCCD, and to everyone participating today and who made this event possible, and to all of you joining this today. And it's good to be with you, Ms. Ford. We haven't met. I'm very sorry for your loss, and we're honored to be here with you today and be together in this work. My name is Jim McMillan. I'm the founder and director of the Philadelphia Center for Gun Violence Reporting. We collaborate with journalists, researchers, and the survivor community to advance more empathetic, ethical, and impactful reporting on gun violence and prevention. We do this through journalist training programs, and community engagement programs, and rigorous scientific research. And you're going to hear from our team on all aspects of that work today. We were especially encouraged a few months ago to learn that the PCCD's new Resources for Victims of Gun Violence Needs Assessment not only referenced our work, but included a call for trauma training for journalists. So here's the issue. Our community engagement, anecdotal feedback, and our research show that too much news reporting on gun violence is doing more harm than good, when it could, in fact, instead be playing a bigger role in prevention. I always want to point out when I say this that we see all the reporting. We see the best reporting too. We see news reporting that is trauma-informed, community-informed, evidence-based, solutions-oriented, and focused on public health responses that can help prevent gun violence. And we respect journalists. We know it's hard work. A lot of us know firsthand. We have staffers, consultants, and other key stakeholders on our team who have covered literally thousands of incidents of gun violence and gun death. And we know that journalists have the best of intentions, but mostly we see the sort of harmful reporting we're going to be talking about today. And we know that journalists care about their communities and our communities. And it's in that spirit that we want to share this information that may be new to some that will help everyone do a better job and provide a more valuable public service. Could I have my next slide, please? And this is our homepage at pcgvr.org. You don't have to remember that. It has lots of resources, but we're going to have a slide with a QR code at the end of the program today. But this is there's a photograph on the homepage from our recent national conference. Next slide, please. We called the conference What Now? Gun Violence Reporting in Unprecedented Times. This was the conference team, all of whom play some role in our organization and our programs. Next. So this wasn't a conference where we brought in the sort of conference where we brought in a lot of outside experts. Those are great too. But instead, we developed a curriculum in gun violence prevention reporting and took this opportunity to share everything we have learned during our first 5 years. Next. And nearly 120 people attended from across the country. I forget how many states, a dozen or more, and as well as we had others from Canada and Mexico, and nearly half of them participated in our gun violence prevention reporting certification program. But they weren't just journalists. We also had community-based experts, prevention experts, researchers, public officials, students, and others. And there was just a great hunger for our work. And I think that's my next slide, my last slide already. What we heard most in our post-conference survey of attendees was gratitude for bringing all of these groups together, from journalists for helping connect them with more survivors and other sorts of experts, but also from survivors who learned that journalists are hardworking people doing their best with some very difficult challenges. So that's it for my slides. We'll have a lot of resources on the screen at the end of the program, and I can't wait for you to meet the team. So thanks again, everybody. I'll be handing it off to Sam Cook, the PCCD Policy and Legislative Director. I think we met when you attended our first conference in 2019, and it's great to be together again.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Jim. You're always a hard act to follow, not to mention Tina and the LG, but I'll do my best. Good afternoon, everyone. Sam Cook, happy to be with you all. I'll go to the next slide. And before we dive any deeper into today's discussion, wanted to take a couple of minutes just to offer some statistics and trends to help ground the conversation. Often when we hear the phrase gun violence, the first thing that comes to a lot of folks' minds are the incidents that capture headlines. That gunshots, things like mass shootings, for instance. But we know that the reality is that gun violence, it takes many forms and has far-reaching impacts across the Commonwealth. And so let's start with just a couple facts that might surprise you. The first has already popped up on our slide, and that's that according to data collected by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, as well as our partners at the Pennsylvania Department of Health, suicides account for the largest share of gun-related deaths statewide, and guns are also used in the majority of fatal suicide attempts, a testament to their lethality. So this is a huge issue for the Commonwealth and for the country. For our next surprising fact, guns are also used in the majority of homicides in Pennsylvania, full stop, and that includes the majority of domestic violence homicides. According to our partners of the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence and their 2024 fatality report, nearly 2/3 of domestic violence homicides last year involved firearms. Our third surprising fact is that firearm-related injuries remain the leading cause of death among children, teens, and young adults across our country, as well as here in the Commonwealth. And in fact, gun violence is now the leading cause of death for members of Generation Z. For baby boomers out there, it's things like heart attacks. So just for compare and contrast. And then finally, our last surprising fact for you is that while large cities like Philadelphia or Pittsburgh often come to mind in this discussion, the truth is that gun violence affects communities statewide, from our biggest cities to small cities, small towns, and rural communities. So something else that might surprise you is that Pennsylvania is making progress. So as Lieutenant Governor Davis shared earlier, after years of sharp increases in firearm violence, injuries, and fatalities during the pandemic, we are finally seeing some real declines in violence, and that is certainly welcome news. Last year, homicides dropped in 30 of our 67 counties across Pennsylvania, and that led to a 23% decrease in murders. That outpaced the national average. But it's important to note, of course, that progress certainly isn't victory. And as you can see on the stats from this slide, gun violence still affects far too many Pennsylvanians, especially youth, especially young adults, and especially communities and people of color. And we also know that while many communities experienced a reduction in violence over the past 2 years, in many places, levels of violence remain elevated or are heading in the wrong direction. So on the next slide, you can take a look at a couple of maps. We're big fans of maps at PCCD. It helps really contextualize some of these trends. And this shows statewide county by county trends from the period of time of 2023 to 2024. So the map on the left shows trends for homicides, and the map on the right shows assaults with firearms. So you can see that counties shaded in blue on both of those maps are those that saw year-over-year decreases in homicides or assaults. And these are the places that have helped drive that positive change statewide that I was just mentioning. But as you can see, there are several counties that are shaded tan, meaning that incidents in those counties actually went up at the same time that statewide trends were going down. And then our last slide just really hits home that while fatal shootings often get the most attention, it is really important to remember that many individuals who are shot survive those injuries. And as we noted at the top, firearm injuries remain widespread in many places across the Commonwealth. So you can see on this map, every single county in Pennsylvania is shaded, and that's because every single county experienced a firearm injury during that period. So the good news is, as you can see in that line graph, we've turned an important corner. In 2023, firearm injuries decreased for the first time statewide in nearly 4 years. So just to sort of wrap before I turn things over to Rondé to share his perspective, just important, we're encouraged by that progress. The data reminds us, however, that that work is far from over. It continues to impact far too many folks, and obviously the burden is not shared equally. But I think the positive trends that we're seeing show that change certainly is possible, and it's already happening in a lot of communities across Pennsylvania. And I think it's a reminder, and we know that everybody on today's call, including journalists and members of the media, have a really important role to play in driving and shaping and highlighting that important work. So with that, I will turn the microphone over to my colleague Orande to say more about his perspective.
Okay. How you doing, everybody? Thanks for having me. My name is Orande McLean. I'm the gun violence. I am the director of Survivor Connection with PCGVR. Next slide. Uh, next slide. So this is my personal story. At the age of 10, I got shot in the back of the head at a drive-by shooting, where I was paralyzed all on my right side. I was in a coma for 7.5 weeks. I had to learn how to write and talk and everything over. I used to be right-handed, now I'm left-handed. So one bullet just altered my life and it changed everything. Um, there's some sensories here. I tried to commit suicide over 23 times because I lost my childhood. I didn't want to die. I just wanted to be back at a 10-year-old boy that I used to run and play Pokemon cards all the time. Next slide. So I found the home with PCGVR. My first role um was I did a short documentary about my experience as a credible messenger at a project. Next slide, please. And this is some behind the scenes. This is a couple of the survivors, Leon and Free. Leon was paralyzed from the waist down. Free got shot 9 times. And we did a whole documentary on like, why us? They don't care. They don't care about us, or do they? Next slide, please. Then I still was a credible messenger with PCGVR. I start hitting the ground running. I began visiting all the newsrooms across the U.S. and Philadelphia. Here is the Washington and St. Louis. Next slide, please. Then I co-produced and hosted The Second Trauma, a documentary that's about news reporting that does more harm than good. A lot of people think that they're doing a good job, but it causes more trauma. Um, Next slide, please. We had a premiere. This is one of the most exciting things in my life. We partnered with Temple University and Professor Yvonne Laddie at the Logan Center, and we did one. We did the premiere at Temple. Next slide, please. We've been on tour ever since, visiting newsrooms, journalist conference, colleges, and universities. Next slide, please. This is where I brought to life, bringing journalists and survivors together, the Survivor Connection. I did a Bridge Leader Fellow at the Stoneleaf Foundation, and this was my project, the Survivor Connection. Far too long that survivors are left behind news stories. Nobody cares about survivors, right? It's like we're left behind. And so I did newsrooms. I did a directory where all of survivors and co-victims we train. Next slide, please. So these are the maps, and This is all the zip codes. So Philadelphia, we go under zip codes. So say if somebody got shot at 19141, you have maybe 7 survivors that's in that zip code. The newsrooms can call them and see, hey, example, like next slide, please. So like me, you see, Aranda McLean, this is my example. I'm available from 5 to 7. Here go my email, here go my phone number, and all the roles that I play. So the newsrooms can call me and say, hey, Aranda, do you know this survivor, or do you know this co-victim that's a person that just got shot? Instead of newsrooms knocking on the person's door saying, hey, your son or your daughter just got shot. And how do you feel about that? No, let's stop. Let's pause. Let's take a breath. And you have a credible messenger there the whole time to help them out. Next slide, please. This is a 3-minute video before reporters or journalists get access to all my survivors. Before they get access, they have to have you have to have passed this 3-minute video. It showed be compassionate, like pause, relax. We control the narrative. Do not try to overtalk us. Next slide, please. And this is the 2 people that I adore the most. Dr. Gene Wright, he's the Deputy Commissioner of Mental Health in New York City, and you have Professor Eli Ratty, and you have Sammy Kaola, but I don't have a picture, but she's on here. You'll hear about it in a couple of minutes. So she does the public health piece, because gun violence is a public health issue, and a lot of people don't know that. So we trained them on public health. We have 2 videos. Then Dr. Gene Wright talks about the trauma, because in these sessions, it's a lot of scars that we're unpeeling, and he talks about that. And Professor Elon Laddie, she talks about media literacy. A lot of people don't know what off the record, on the record is. I didn't know that. I just had a microphone stuck to my face and I start talking. So next slide, please. And that's me. If you have any questions or concerns, I would love to answer them at the end. But Survivor Connection is a great resource. All the reporters, all the journalists, they love it. And all the survivors, they want to help out. Y'all just have to, reporters and journalists have to give us a chance. So sign up for Survivor Connection and hear their story. Hear how they want to help. Thank you.
Everyone.
Go ahead, sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Thanks, Aranda. Thanks so much for that heartfelt story that you shared, and a great introduction to the research work that we do at PCGBR. So I'm Jessica Beard. I'm a trauma surgeon. So that means that I take care of people who are shot every day. I work at Temple, which takes care of the largest number of people who are shot in the state of Pennsylvania. So gun violence is very personal to me as well. I'm also the interim medical director for the trauma program. I direct trauma research. Those are my hats at Temple. And with the Philadelphia Center for Gun Violence Reporting, I'm the director of research. And that's made possible through a fellowship from the Stone Lee Foundation. Next slide. So I'm here to talk today about best practices in reporting on gun violence. And, you know, I think that one thing that makes our work at the Philadelphia Center for Gun Violence Reporting unique is that we are really focused on centering the perspectives of survivors and those with lived experience, but we're also interested in research and interested in sort of using evidence to inform the best practices that we recommend. Next slide. I won't spend too much time on this slide because we got a great overview from Sam. We saw the state with shootings. This is gun deaths. And I just use this because I think folks think of Philadelphia as sort of this epicenter of gun violence in the state, but gun violence is affecting everyone. Actually, it's at some similar rates compared to Philadelphia and other parts of the state. And while most of our work and research focuses on reporting on community firearm violence or interpersonal firearm violence, a lot of these recommendations do apply to reporting on other forms of firearm violence that may be more common in your area that you're in. Next slide. So fortunately, thanks to the kind of lifting of the federal ban on research and the overturning of the Dickey Amendment that had been active since the 1990s, we do have solutions to gun violence. And over the past couple of decades, there have been tons of research studies that have examined these solutions. We have federal, state, and local policies that when enacted can prevent gun violence, of which PA has some, but not enough. We know that from great research out of Philadelphia that built environment improvements like access to safe green spaces can prevent gun violence. We know that hospital and community-based programs can prevent gun violence, specifically hospital-based violence intervention programs like the Temple Trauma Victim Advocacy Program that we have here at my hospital that is so graciously supported by PCCD, have a strong evidence base for gun violence prevention and also for recovery after trauma. And then at its most kind of basic, access to social services, access to healthcare, those are all things that are gun violence prevention tools. But the truth is that if you turned on your local TV news or opened up a newspaper, you'd be unlikely to see these solutions presented. At least that's what our research shows. And you'd be unlikely to see the root causes of gun violence that are so kind of deeply related to the social and structural determinants of health presented in news reports about gun violence. Next slide. And what you'd instead be likely to see, and again, there is good reporting out there, but the majority of reporting looks like what communication scholars call episodic crime reports. Episodic means that the news report is focused on a single shooting event in isolation, and crime means that it presents largely the perspective of law enforcement or police, and those perspectives are sort of held above the perspectives of victims and those with lived experience. And decades of communication scholarship has shown that this type of reporting can lead news audiences to blame the victims of crime and of gun violence, and it can undermine effective public health responses, all those solutions that we do have that we need public support for. And of course, it's not just on TV news, it's also on in print journalism and social media is a whole nother kind of area where some of these narratives can persist. I mean, it's not only just in Philadelphia where we do our research. There's similar findings in news reporting in California. And fundamentally, it's rooted in harmful news practices that are frankly racist, that date back to the 1960s with Action News and Eyewitness News. Next slide. So at PCGBR, as I mentioned, we're really focused on research, and we're also focused on centering the perspectives of survivors. So when we set out to kind of build our research portfolio and to begin to understand what we might recommend when it comes to best practices for reporting on gun violence, we went directly to survivors. In the summer of 2021, we went to the Temple Trauma Clinic, and that was really during that terrible peak in gun violence that we experienced in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania and throughout the country. And we asked 26 people who'd been recently shot about the news reports on their injuries. And we did what's called the thematic analysis. We looked at themes across what people told us. And what we found was that people who'd been shot identified a preponderance of harms, all sorts of harms that they associated with news reports about their injuries. They felt dehumanized when their news reports were those episodic crime style reports. They were worried that news reports were actually contributing to a cycle of violence where people felt unsafe and where people were purchasing firearms. And they felt when certain content elements were included that there were threats to their safety and potential harms to their reputation. So I'm going to just share two quotations from this research study, and I will just highlight that all of these research studies are going to be available in a resource link, so you're welcome to read them. They're all published open access. Next slide. They didn't ask me any questions. There was no calls made to me or talked to me personally. They didn't tell the story from my perspective. It was like she was shot and that's it. I would prefer if they asked me specific feelings about me if they actually interviewed me instead of just writing it like I'm a nobody. So that episodic crime report that I think journalists often think is just the facts is actually causing harm to people. It's making people feel dehumanized when their narratives are excluded. Next slide. You report the gun violence, but why not do a follow-up report for the victims, the survivors, the families that had to bury these people, the whole process? Just don't do a guy got shot over there, a guy got shot over here. You're making people more fearful. You're more fearful. You're going to arm yourself more. So this speaks to, the gun purchasing that happened during COVID, to firearm carrying, and to the harmful kind of perpetuation of crime and violence, and sort of this epidemic of crime and violence that these kind of sensationalistic news reports present. And then it also speaks to what Tina mentioned, the need for follow-up stories, which we hear a lot from survivors, and it is one of our recommendations. Next slide. So after we heard about these harms that our patients told us in the news reports about their injuries, we set out to really define what is harmful reporting on community firearm violence specifically. And we brought together 21 content experts into an anonymous multi-round survey to try to establish what is harmful. And those experts include not only those with lived experience, but also scholars and journalists. And these are the 12 potentially harmful news content elements that were identified by those experts. And you can see a lot of this is informed by what the patients told us in our research study and what sort of the communication literature has already established as harmful. Topping the list is graphic and explicit content, and that was seen as actually one of the most harmful content elements of all. Other things are the things traditionally included in these episodic crime reports that could kind of sensationalize or escalate the narrative, absence of a follow-up story, episodic framing, stories that rely, mostly on police and don't include firearm injured people and the community, and of course, stories that don't explore solutions. Next slide. This is a graphic that just shows, the 12 harmful content elements and how our experts in our Delphi panel, our Delphi consensus study, felt that they kind of caused harm in terms of, how harmful they were, sort of at the individual level of people who'd been shot viewing news reports, all the way up to the level of society. And we can see that graphic and explicit content seem to be the most harmful across levels. And then when we think about how news reports are harming our society, our experts felt like episodic framing, stories with only law enforcement narrators, and those that don't explore solutions are the most harmful to society. And that makes sense, right? Because we're looking to the news for information, and we're kind of seeing gun violence reaffirmed as this, wholly as a crime issue or as an individualistic issue. And we're not really getting the information that we need in order to support policies that are going to be effective. Next slide. One thing that is important to know, and that our research has shown, is that not all shootings are created equally when it comes to making the news. And when we looked at TV news reports in Philadelphia, we found that they actually overreport certain types of shootings. So that includes the shootings of children, mass shootings, and then shootings that occur in neighborhoods with higher income, actually less income inequality, and lower rates of racialized economic segregation. So, essentially what this means is that if you were to watch TV news, you really wouldn't understand the full picture of gun violence and who it impacts. And that's really important because resources can get shunted away from the places that need it the most. And I think even policymakers can sometimes start to focus on the rarest types of gun violence as they make their policies, specifically, when it comes to mass shootings. Next slide. So at PCGVR, can we think about reporting differently, as Jim mentioned? Next slide. Or just click it. And we ask, what if journalists can be part of the solution to gun violence? Rather than just reporting sort of what we think is this unbiased episodic narrative, which it actually isn't, it's causing harm. What if we can frame gun violence as preventable? Next slide. So at PCGVR, we are basically creating a new way of reporting on gun violence, and we're giving journalists the tools to do that. And we call that gun violence prevention reporting. And at its very base, this type of reporting starts with the worldview that gun violence is preventable, it's not inevitable, and we need to actually present root causes and solutions to help people understand it better. Next slide. Gun violence prevention reporting is trauma-informed, which we'll hear about later from Sammy. It's empathetic, it offers solutions, and not just puff pieces. It uses the principles of solutions journalism to actually present evidence-based solutions, the evidence for and against those solutions, and ask questions. And it utilizes a public health frame as opposed to an episodic crime frame. Next slide. At PCGVR, we've defined the public health frame to include epidemiologic context. And that means not just the race to the 500th homicide, but actually kind of letting people know, is gun violence increasing or decreasing? Who does it impact? If you report on the shooting of a child, you emphasize that that's a rare event. It includes its root causes, as I mentioned, framing and centering gun violence in its social and structural determinants of health. It includes people like me telling their stories and their perspectives on gun violence, others, imagery besides police, and solutions. Next slide. We worked with Frameworks, which is a kind of framing sort of design think tank, to actually create a toolkit for journalists. And this is available on our website. It'll be available on our resource kit. We're really really proud of this toolkit. It includes, all sorts of recommendations for reporting on gun violence that we've heard from journalists is very useful and practical. And it was made after multiple rounds of feedbacks and iteration with journalists. So I'm going to just include just 2 little snippets from the toolkit, and I'm happy to answer more questions about this. Next slide. So in the toolkit, we have do's and don'ts. This is modeled after recommendations from the World Health Organization for reporting on suicide. And it is based on sort of the evidence and what our patients told us of what's harmful and helpful. And I'll just pull out a few. Specifically in the do's, we recommend directing audiences to community resources. And again, if you were to watch a TV news report about suicide, you would see resources for suicide prevention. And we recommend the same thing when it comes to reporting on other forms of gun violence. And again, if you're reporting on a woman or a child, you can emphasize that that type of shooting is rare. Next slide. It also helps journalists to really think about what does it mean to report root causes, frame gun violence as a public health problem, and prevent solutions. And I chose this one because, again, we're so thankful to PCCD for all of their support of hospital-based violence intervention programs. So gun violence driver number 1 is lack of access to social supports. That's an evidence-based cause of gun violence. The way you might frame that in a news story is gun violence is driven in part by a lack of social support, such as health insurance and violence recovery services. Without a reliable safety net for people to depend on in times of crisis, gun violence can spread. Click. Can you click? And the solution is increasing and improving healthcare-based solutions like hospital-based violence intervention programs can help reduce gun violence. And again, I think these drivers are not only helpful for journalists and news reports, but they're also helpful for advocates and for, public health folks and people trying to explain gun violence as a public health problem. Next slide. So that's it for me. Thank you so much. And I'll introduce Sammy Kayola to present more about best practices in gun violence reporting.
Hey, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Beard, for that awesome overview. I will try to go fast. I know we are low on time today. I'm Sammy Kayola. I'm the gun violence reporter for Chalkbeat Philadelphia. It's our local bureau of a national outlet covering education, and I'm specifically writing about gun violence in and around Philadelphia schools. Today, I want to just give some really kind of day-to-day helpful things for journalists who are interviewing people who've experienced trauma. And even if you're somebody who works with a trauma survivor, these are tools that you could even convey to them if they are going to be working with the media. These are just things that we can keep in mind to make sure that the journalistic process is coming from a place of care, which care is not a word that you hear in journalism school. And it's not a word you're going to hear from your editors. But it's something that I've come to carry with me. The more survivors I've met and the more trauma reporting I've done, I have felt really like it is my responsibility to also care about the people that I am using in my journalistic process. Can we go to the next slide? So trauma-informed journalism is about creating safe and predictable spaces. It's about forgetting all the rules that we usually abide by when we're interviewing school board officials and politicians, and recognizing that when it comes to trauma, we need to be treating our interview subjects differently. That's from Tamara Cherry. She hosts an awesome podcast called The Trauma Beat. There's a book of the same name. She is a friend to PCGBR, and you can find lots of great resources from her work. Next one. So these are a couple of definitions that in the course of my trauma journalism study have helped me to sort of stay on the course. There's something called institutional betrayal, which is like when a system that you think is going to help you actually hurts you, right? Such as you go to report a crime to the police and then you end up a victim of the carceral system, for example, or maybe you go to the doctor and you end up more sick than when you came in. This can happen with journalism too. People can sign up to be part of a journalistic process, and when it isn't the way they expected it to be, such as a reporter interviews them for 3 hours and then they never hear from that reporter again, or then the story comes out and they're not anywhere in the article, or they're in one sentence or 30 seconds, and they weren't given a heads up about that, it can be more harmful, which is not something you always think about when you're planning a story. Things change all the time in journalism, but to avoid that sense of institutional betrayal, journalism being an institution, it's something where we have to do some legwork in advance. The term moral injury has always really stuck with me. It's when you do something that goes against your fundamental moral values. And I think most journalists really do want to do the right thing. We don't want to harm people. And I can't tell you how many nights I've lost sleep thinking that something that's coming out tomorrow might harm someone else, right? And so if we can learn these tools and integrate them into our work, we are less likely to do something that goes against our own ethics. And then the last one is compassion fatigue, which is kind of similar to vicarious trauma or secondary trauma. It's just the continued listening to stories about trauma. Doing too much of that, if you're a journalist, can sometimes make people a little desensitized, make people feel like this is normal, or it's not impacting me emotionally anymore because I've taken in so much of it. I think it's a little bit dangerous for journalists to get to that place because it's psychologically harmful for us, and it also makes it harder for us to do our jobs and to show care in our reporting and to treat people like human beings. So that's something that, if there are editors in this conversation, or if you know editors, to try to encourage them to give their reporters some space to breathe, so that they don't become fatigued by the amount of trauma reporting they might do. Next slide. So these are some categories for when you're moving through the journalistic process. I usually spend like an hour explaining these. I'm going to try to just go through them quick. But say I'm getting ready to interview a survivor. I want to make sure that the place we're going to do that is a safe place for them, that they're not near, a place where a former perpetrator might see them. Maybe they don't want to be near their children because they don't want to talk about traumatic things around their children. They don't want to be in a place where they've experienced trauma before. So, making someone comfortable, bringing tissues, right? Things that, again, you wouldn't do for an interview with a politician. And then providing a sense of control during an interview. So opening the floor to them, checking in before you switch topics. Maybe you're going to escalate the conversation to something a little bit more difficult. Maybe give a heads up that you're going to go there and say, is that okay? Offer breaks. Ask if there's anything that they might need in the course of a long and difficult interview. Something else you can do during the interview process is just keep checking back. Okay, you said this. I want to make sure that I understood it correctly. Or can I clarify this with you? I think this helps survivors feel like you're really listening, like it really matters to you whether you get their story right. And I think it helps them feel a little bit less scared of what the outcome of this journalistic process might be. You can also really look out for how people seem. Are they getting a little red in the face? Are they getting a little out of breath? Are they looking around a lot? Do they seem edgy or nervous? Those are moments where you want to offer someone a break. If somebody tells you something really hard, I think a lot of us have a tendency to just try to move on past that, or try to say, oh, yeah, it's not so bad. There's this good thing, right? But that actually kind of erases someone's experience. So I think we all have to work on just absorbing what someone says, and not trying to gloss over it or not trying to pretend that we understand if we haven't had that experience. And like the word traumatized, it's pretty vague, right? Like, what does it actually mean? Yes, it means you experienced trauma, but what actually matters is how it's affecting your life. What are the day-to-day functions where you feel this trauma? How does this trauma impede you? And what resources help you cope with this trauma, right? So learning how to ask more specific and therefore more helpful questions that you can integrate into your journalism is something that I think all of us reporters need to think about a little more. And then this last one is closure. So here's what's going to come next. Here's when you might hear from me. Here's my cell phone number. What can you expect from the rest of this process? And like Jessica said earlier, offering a resource. Like, yes, we should include them when we publish an article, but you also can have some ready to go when you go to an interview, just to give to an individual person. And also, I've come to really emphasize to people that their story matters, kind of explain to them like why it's important for me to talk to them, and what impact this journalism might have, what change might this catalyze. And I really feel for people, because an article is not going to change what happened to them. It's not going to erase any loss that they're still healing from. But I think a lot of folks, they want their voices heard because they think it could help others in the same situation. And so I try to provide that little bit of insight. Next slide, please. This is just another quote from Gavin Reese. He's with the DART Center, which is now called the Global Center for Journalism and Trauma. Insightful trauma reporting can promote accountability, foster the resilience of individuals, and help the public meaningfully engage in issues that have a determining value to the quality of their lives. So that's a positive impact that's possible. And the next slide. Partial and inaccurate reporting that is high in entertainment value but low on insight and sensitivity likely compounds distress, marginalizes victims and survivors, and diminishes society's ability to face key decisions. So that's the flip side of if we don't take these measures. And the last thing that I want to talk about, next slide, please. We've heard solutions journalism a few times. This is along those lines. I like to think about resilience. How do we build resilience in the communities where we report? I think solutions journalism is a big part of that. That can mean covering responses and resources, covering stories about forgiveness, and covering stories about building better systems. So I have some examples here that you're welcome to go and find on your own, but things like, a mother forgiving her son's perpetrator, a new generation of young people learning how to de-escalate conflicts, things that really give us a sense of people banding together and making change for their future. So next slide, please. That is the end for me. I have an email down there for the Association of Gun Violence Reporters. That's our national network of journalists who cover this topic. We join together to try to share these practices and also just kind of support one another as we cover this difficult topic. I have another email there for my Chalkbeat job if you have any story ideas related to schools that you'd like to share. And that's it.
Jim, are you moderating the Q&A, or we don't have any questions?
Sure. No, I thought before. Hi, this is Jim, and I'll be here for the Q&A. I understand next we have Kathy Buckley from the PCCD Office of Victim Services, the director of the PCCD Office of Victim Services.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. As Jim said, my name is Kathy Buckley, and I'm the director of the Office of Victim Services at PCCD. So thank you all for being here today and for your continued commitment to supporting victims in the communities impacted by gun violence. A very special thank you to the Philadelphia Center for Gun Violence Reporting and our amazing presenters for sharing their expertise and insights with us today. Before we wrap up, I want to take a moment to highlight or in some cases, re-highlight a few resources that we hope you'll take with you. First, I encourage you to visit our resources for Victims of Gun Violence Initiative webpage, accessible via the QR code that you see on your screen right there. On this page, you'll find more information about the initiative, our statewide needs assessment, as well as links to our statewide, our Pittsburgh, our Philadelphia, and our T-Zone reports. Each one of these reports includes specific information and takeaways from each region of the Commonwealth. Whether you're a member of the media, a service provider, or an advocate, these findings can really be a valuable tool in your efforts to support communities and drive meaningful change. So next, I want to highlight our Victims Compensation Assistance Program, or better known as VCAP. Administered by PCCD, VCAP is a vital resource for individuals and families impacted by crime and violence. And just as Lieutenant Governor Austin Davis mentioned earlier, just last week, we secured an additional $9 million in funding for this program through the 25-26 state budget. And this is a critical win for victims across the Commonwealth. VCAP provides the financial assistance for expenses such as medical bills, counseling, funeral costs, crime scene cleanup, relocation, and more. So we're asking you all to please spread the word about VCAP, because no victim should have to choose between healing and financial hardship. And no family should have to bear the burden of funeral costs after losing a loved one to violence. You can learn more about VCAP by visiting our website or connecting with your local victim service programs by accessing those QR codes you see on this slide. And lastly, I want to circle back to the resources shared earlier by our partners at the Philadelphia Center for Gun Violence and Reporting. The QR code on this slide links to a curated collection of initiatives and research, including their Better Gun Violence Reporting Toolkit. I strongly encourage you to explore their work. It's really a powerful example of how evidence-based research, storytelling, and community engagement can drive meaningful change. And as we reflect on the progress that we've made since June of 2023, when our chair, Lieutenant Governor Austin Davis, tasked us with launching the Resources for Victims of Gun Violence Initiative, I'm incredibly proud of how far we've come. But we also know that our work is far from over. Moving forward, it's partnerships like this one that are essential as we continue to raise awareness, educate the public, and deliver critical resources to communities across Pennsylvania. So whether you're a journalist, a victim service provider, or a gun violence prevention advocate, your role is vital. It's only when we come together that we can create lasting change and build safer, stronger communities. So thank you again for your time. I will turn it back over to Jim for the moderating of the Q&A session.
Thanks so much, Kathy, and thanks again to everybody presenting today and everybody who made it possible. I was asked to curate the questions, so please feel free to drop them in the chat. We had some hiccups at the top of the program, and maybe could have told you that sooner. But you know, and of course, we know some of you have some other places to be, maybe even some of our panelists. But we still have nearly 50 people online here, and I have been told we can run over. So I'm going to continue until someone stops. If I have some questions too, the only one in the chat, the first one in the chat anyway, and the only one in the chat so far, says, I'm very interested on VCAP training for credible messenger staff and interview tool. So I'm going to presume that's a reference to the Victims Compensation Assistance Program. And in terms of PCGVR, you know, our training is designed around journalists, but it's been helpful to many others. And I'd say the best way to find out about our next training would be to go to our homepage, pcgvr.org, click the contact button and drop us a message. But if anybody else has anything to add or say in response to that question, I might be a little bit out of my realm.
And if you are interested in VCAP training, we can definitely assist with that as well. And so we can be in contact with you, Jeannie, and inquire if that's what you are looking for. And the next question, we could go on for a while. We have a question from Eric Marsh Sr. Eric is the Director of Operations on our team here at the Philadelphia Center for Gun Violence Reporting. And he asked, perhaps after joining and helping create our recent conference, how our work with journalists is applicable to the average citizen. I could look at that any number of ways, but I'm inclined to
start with Dr. Beard. You focus a lot, we all focus a lot on harmful reporting, but can you talk a little bit more about how reporting might actually help prevent violence? That's one way that might affect an average citizen. And if Eric, if you have more specific angles of that I'm missing, let us know.
Sure. I mean, I think we, start from the idea that way that gun violence is communicated to the public is how the public understands gun violence, or at least the public is accessing media and news to understand social problems. And I think, my concern and the way that I first got interested in this is that, for me, gun violence is this very human problem. It's something that, has lots of very complex stories, including survivorship and, resiliency and all of the things that you don't see in sort of the nighttime news reports about another shooting in Kensington. And I think, what I thought is when I saw that news report, and I went to the news reports to try to understand more about my patients that maybe I didn't get to meet. And when I saw that, I thought, wow, this is what the public thinks is gun violence and the kind of the impact of gun violence on our society, they're not going to understand it. And that's what motivates me to do this work. It's from sort of the human aspect and the human toll and the rippling effects of gun violence, all to, solutions that we know that work, that we need social support and we need policy change for. And I think kind of everything in between. And I think, putting together the tools of public health with the kind of strong storytelling that can come from the narrative of survivors into, deeper and more meaningful stories of gun violence, we think will, help shape public opinion to the realities of gun violence and support and, improve public support for policies that will actually prevent gun violence. So that's is that what you were getting at, Jim?
Sure. I mean, we could go off in any number of directions, but that's great. Thank you so much, Dr. Beard. And again, there's room for more. We've got room for more questions. I still see 30-something people out there. But related to that, Rhonda, I'd like to ask you. You said today, and I've heard you say before, how a bullet altered your life, and then today you said you found a home in this work, which is. And it means the world to me. It's an incredible thing to hear. But I wonder what you would say to other survivors who might benefit, from perhaps engaging the media, sharing their stories, maybe taking control of their stories. And, maybe some people are more ready than others. But is there a power in that, in sharing your story that feels good and productive that you'd recommend to some others who might be ready? And how do they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I just use myself as an example. It's like I didn't know how to tell my story. I didn't know who to go to. I didn't know what to say. Like the media literacy part, I didn't know how to tell it. So talking to PCGVR and going through the Survivor Connection is like, okay, now I'm trained and now I'm ready to tell my story, or not even tell my story, help somebody else tell their story. Just like the first question where Eric said, is like being a part of Survivor Connection, you're actually saving like another person's lives, because we're bridging the gap between the media and the community. So now it's like we teamed up to like fight crime. Like that's how I put it together. So now you have all these people and all these survivors trying to help the media and helping reporters. Is like, okay, now we're unstoppable. Now that we are a better team because we equipped with survivors and the media.
Thanks so much, Rhonda. That's very inspiring, like everything you do. So thank you. Hey, Sammy, another way I'd like to bring you on this, on the question of, how it's, helpful to the average citizen. Could you want to just talk briefly about how journalists serves the citizen and how and how how we bring this information? How does journalism help citizens, perhaps participate in civic life, and then perhaps especially related to gun violence and prevention?
Yeah, when you asked that question, I went right to the idea of like healthy, active streets and neighborhoods. And you just mentioned civic life. And I think just being a citizen in Philadelphia, I've only been here for 3 years, but I came in 2022 at a crisis moment with gun violence, and people were so afraid to navigate their neighborhoods, afraid to sit on their porch, because gun violence was a real risk, and it was mostly happening in very specific neighborhoods. But I think there was just this this kind of fear across the city, that Philly was a dangerous place. And I love Philadelphia, and I don't like thinking about Philadelphia that way. And I like thinking about it as a place where people are working really hard to take care of each other and take care of their blocks, whether they're doing a cleanup at their local park, or they're a block captain, or they're helping with an after-school program, or they're a faith-based organization that's opening their doors. I think there are so many places of refuge and people of refuge. And it's something I'm thinking a lot about now that I'm covering schools, is how are we keeping our children safe from gun violence, which I think every person in the city, no matter what their income level or race or background or neighborhood is, we all want that. And as a journalist, I just, I don't think it is controversial for me to say that I don't want any of my fellow Philadelphians to die or to be shot and injured by a bullet, right? And so I'm not afraid to say that, and I don't think any journalist should be. So I think beyond that kind of just brotherly love, so to speak, there's also the accountability factor. There's also journalists making sure that funding from the city or the state is being properly allocated. There are many policy decisions being made about gun violence on a weekly, monthly basis. And I do think it's our job to keep voters informed on that, how they might vote, how they might donate money, who they might support, etc. Regular basic function of accountability journalism, but I think especially in the current moment, as gun violence remains a threat in our city, that's our role, is to provide information.
Thank you, Sammy. That's a very helpful perspective. Aranda, I'm going to come back to you on this next question. I think a lot of us on our team might have similar ideas, but you're the real authority here from the community perspective. And so I'll read the question. It says, regarding children bringing weapons, firearms, or knives, and it doesn't say where to bring them, but wherever they're bringing them out, right? It seems there are often only short stories, but never follow-up stories. And maybe we could say that about many facets, many problems related to gun violence. Does the panel think follow-up stories may deter future violence? And whether it's on the grounds, school grounds, or community and elsewhere. But Randy, I feel like I've heard you talk about the need for follow-up stories. And I'm interested in your opinion and what else you're hearing from, other community experts you work with.
Yeah, just like Sammy said, like follow-up stories are so important. I talk to a lot of survivors all the time, and they say, Rondé, somebody saw a story say, I got shot and I'm in critical condition. Next year, I got my own nonprofit. I'm doing amazing work, but nobody knows that because they might think I'm still in critical condition. They don't know nothing because nobody does follow-up stories. Well, most of the time. They doing follow-up stories now because PCGBR is paving the way. But follow-up stories are so important. We need to know what's going on. Yeah, that's all I gotta say about that. I like hammered every reporter about follow-up stories because it's necessary. Like they follow court stories all the time. You hear about that every single day. But when it's gun violence, no, it's just somebody's in critical condition, they got shot, and you never talk about it again.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I just want to be fair, since it was a question for the whole panel, does anybody else want to respond to that?
Sure, I can go. I mean, I think, one of the things that we emphasize is the need for humanistic stories about gun violence and, ones that are larger and deeper than just the crime scene and the bullet casings. And I think that's what follow-up stories, have the opportunity to do, especially when they're focused on survivorship or, focused on more longer term effects of gun violence. I think that the story is just completely different than fear, shock, sensation when you're looking at what it's like to survive a shooting. Or, another example of a follow-up story might be, okay, well, we profiled this, community-based intervention. How are they doing a year later? What impact have they had? How do they measure it? And, not necessarily holding community-based organizations to account in the same sort of way, but, following along and in terms of, gun violence prevention. I think one of the most important things that's happening right now is, and I loved the way PCCD framed this, is what is the narrative around why gun violence is down, and number one is it's down. So we got to start with that, but then why, and what evidence do we have for what's working and what isn't, and how do we keep our, pedal, on the accelerator to keep it from, spiking again, and really to get down to preventing all shootings.
Great, thanks so much. And Sammy, Dr. Beard talked about one possibility of follow-up stories, being following the progress of how an organization might be, and the impact an organization might be having over time. And if I understand correctly, what I've learned about your new position, you'll be doing some of this progress reporting, right?
Yeah, I think so. We've had at this point a lot of nonprofit organizations, grassroots orgs that have been doing this work for 3, 4, 5 years. So, they have hopefully had an impact on the neighborhoods they serve and on the youth that they serve. A lot of them are youth serving organizations. So I will be following up with a lot of people to say, hey, what's been going on since we last talked, and how have your strategies had to change, or how have they stayed the same, or are you noticing this decrease that we're seeing citywide, or what are still the problems that you are still trying to tackle? I know for schools, there's still a real fear for children walking to and from school, and especially at dismissal time when things can be particularly chaotic. And so I'm doing some follow-up reporting on a program that launched in 2022 to make school perimeters safer. That program's been in place 3 years. What's happening with it now? So just sort of seeing if things that the city government has funded, if they've had the impact that they were promised to have, and then also checking in on some of these grassroots groups to see what demand has been like, what their roadblocks have been, and how are they navigating the new political landscape and the new federal funding landscape as well.
Terrific, thank you. And perhaps I've got a couple more we could extrapolate upon here, unless anybody wants to get one last one in. I'm going to scroll up a little bit to where there's a comment, not a question, that says there's power in storytelling and identifying as a survivor. Aronde, that's something I've heard you talk about. What do you think when you see news stories that use language around victims versus survivors or other terminology? Any advice in general for how journalists should talk about survivors?
Yeah, I think you got to ask the person what you like to be called. We cannot just assume because you got shot, you're a survivor now. Like, I got shot when I was 10 years old. I wasn't a survivor till I was about 21. I was a victim. It took me a long time to realize I really got shot in the head. I really have these disabilities. Okay, now I overcame that. Now I'm a survivor. So it's individually. You have to ask them first. You can't just label somebody just because they got shot. And that took me a while to understand that too, even doing this work. Oh, you got shot? Oh yeah, you're a survivor. A lot of people say, no, I'm not. So
really helpful, thank you. I feel like we could dig into that topic all day. Okay, the last question here I see it says, how do communities outside of Philadelphia begin this conversation with reporters and also create a survivor discussions? So there are lots of ways to dig into that. I mean, for one thing, you can send them our information, but and we can try to collaborate. But in a nutshell, I would say, reach out to journalists, and your results may vary, and we're sympathetic to journalists. They're always doing more with less, et cetera. And of course, a lot of journalists covering gun violence are impacted by the trauma themselves. So you might find some more responsive than others. One thing I've learned through this process it's better to, rather than tell people how you think they should do things, ask them why they do it the way they do it, and that can lead to a conversation. I wonder, maybe actually, I'd like to open it up to all of you. What can the community do to get started? I'll start with Sammy. What can the community do to connect with, maybe not to journalists like you, but the average journalist, whatever that is? Most journalists. Oh, you're muted, Sammy.
Thank you. I was just blabbering because I was trying to think up an answer. Well, depending on what media outlet you're following, often you can find a reporter's email address attached to their story or somewhere on that news outlet's website. I think we always love to get reactions to our pieces. If something really struck you, or if you had a question, or if it inspired you to access a resource, or inspired you to get involved in something in your community, like, please tell the journalist. Like, we work hard on these things, and then they just kind of go into the world, and it's hard for us to know who they affected and how. So if you're reading something, I wouldn't hesitate to just send a journalist an email. And if you have a problem, or if something really affected you negatively, or you think the journalist could have done something more sensitively or more accurately, then you can tell them that too. And we want to do better. So I would really say just reach out directly. And the good thing about the organization that I'm co-directing, the Association of Gun Violence Reporters, is that we are building a network of journalists across the country that will hopefully have interface with survivors in their communities, and hold things like coffee with a journalist, or come out to an open hours or an office hours or something like that. So just kind of basic community engagement practices, going out and tabling. That onus, I think, is on the journalists to make themselves more public and more transparent, more accessible. But you can reach out to me if you need to find somebody in particular, and I will do my best to help.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Sammy. Rhonda, I'm going to come back to you for the last word, but first I'm going to come back to you, Dr. Beard, one more time. You often say that, we conduct, I might be paraphrasing, but research for action. And you always say not just research to put up on a shelf. I don't know if it's a matter of bringing it to other locales, but what can researchers do to help, once they produce research, to make sure they get it out there?
Sure. I mean, I think part of what we're talking about is journalists and narrative change, but I think there's a larger topic that we're also interested in, which is the narrative generally around gun violence. And if you're someone like me who's a trauma surgeon, or somebody who does research on gun violence, or an advocate, or somebody who just wants to prevent gun violence, if you have an opportunity to talk to a journalist, really thinking about how you can present gun violence as preventable, how you can share your work that you're doing in your organization or your research, and share it in a way that's going to sort of contribute to solutions, if you will. So, I mean, I think that's what I think about when I think about how I'm doing my research, where I'm publishing it, how I'm sharing it, how I'm summarizing it, and what it's for.
Terrific. Thank you very much. And Rhonda, last question, another angle on that last question. We always talk about expanding the Survivor Connection to other cities. Of course, we need to find the funding to build a team, but what do you need? What people, what else do you need to bring the Survivor Connection to, who knows, the next location?
There's other survivors, the other co-victims that want to do the same thing. And I have about 30 survivors in 10 different cities and states, and they want to do the same thing I'm doing. It's just the funding. But the last question, how do you in touch with the journalists? Listen, all I do is I follow them on Instagram. Soon as they follow me back, I ask them questions. Boom, 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 and they reach out to me easily. It's like it's not really hard. I thought it would have been hard. I talked to them on Facebook or Instagram. I tell them, hey, I didn't like what you said on this story, and they say, Arande, well, how can I fix it? So I think y'all could do the same thing.
Terrific. All right. Well, thanks again to everybody, to the team at PCGVR. I'm honored to work with all of you. So grateful today to everyone at PCCD, all the participants, and everybody that spent all this time with us. Thanks again.
Thank you guys so much. I just wanted to let you all know that there are a couple links dropped in the chat too. If anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to anyone who placed their name and email in the chat today. You can also email me, and I will drop my email in the chat as well. But thank you so much for joining today, and really looking forward to keep this progress moving forward. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.